Hey Felix, hope you're having a good trip. Um, so we're going to continue on with Folsom Prison Blues. I can't remember if I had showed you the intro last week, so I'm going to start with that. It's pretty cool. Now, you make a shape like a B7 chord, and a B7 chord, middle finger, second fret, A string, index finger, first fret, D string, ring finger, second fret, G string, and then your pinky, first or second fret, first string, your E string. Now we're going to need this chord for the song, so that's why I'm showing it to you here at this point. Now, the intro uses just the first two fingers here, so middle finger, second fret, that's a B, by the way, and then index finger, first fret, that's a D sharp, and it goes like this. Okay, so we have the B, D sharp, back to B, and then G with a bend, and then your open E. Okay, now that open E becomes the beginning of your E chord alternation. So, and I think that's what we went over last week, where you finger your E chord and then you hit E string, A string, and you alternate. I hear the train a-comin', she's rolling down the bend, and so on. So that intro leads right in to that alternating bass figure. Let me do that again. And so on, okay? Now, there are three chords in the song. You've got your E, you have A, and then you have that B7 that we just discussed. All of them use that alternating bass figure. So E, as we discussed, E string, A string. For the strum part after the bass note, you don't have to hit all the strings. You just kind of flick the first three or four, and you do it kind of soft. It's not very loud. The strums, or I mean, sorry, the picks are on the beat, and the little strums are off the beat, so they're not as strong. And then for your A chord, it's reverse. So you hit your A string, and then your E string. Okay. And then for the B7 chord, this one's a little trickier. You also do A string, E string, but you actually have to move your middle finger from A string to E string. And so you'll want to practice that one a little bit extra, because the trick is holding down all the other fingers while moving that finger. Because sometimes the other fingers want to kind of lift when you lift one finger, so it can take a little time to make that happen. Now, the sequence of chords is just like your blues progression. That's why it's called Folsom Prison Blues. So, after the intro, it does 4 bars of the E. So again, our intro. Well, actually, this is still part of the intro. When the singing starts, I hear the train a-comin', she's rolling down the bend. I since I don't know when. Well, I'm. And then stuck in Folsom Prison, that's when you change to the A. Stuck in Folsom Prison. Time keeps dragging. Back to on E. Then we go to B7. But that train keeps rolling down the sand and then toe. Back to ear E. Okay, so E, A, back to E, and then B7, and then back to E again. The only difference from the blues progression that we learned is that it doesn't go from B7 back to A and then to E. Or in the case of the blues we learned in A, it went E, D, and then A, back to E. Okay. Now, the 1-4-5 progression applies, and I'm struggling to remember if we talked about that. Let's go back to our blues in A. All right. So whatever key you're in, the chord with that name is your 1 chord. So if you're in the key of A is your 1 chord. Okay. So your 4 chord, you'd count up 4 from A, B, C, D. D is your 4 chord. And then your 5 chord, one more after D, E. A, B, C, D, E. So the blues progression is often called a 1-4-5 progression because whatever key you start in, you have that as your 1 chord, and then you also have your 4 and your 5. So when we did blues, A is our 1. And then D was our 4. Then we went back to 1. E was our 5. We did 5, E, D, 4, back to A, 1, and back to 5. And then it starts over again. So in Folsom Prison Blues, we're in the key of E. So now E is our 1 chord. And that makes our 4 chord E, F, G, A. Consequently, then our 5 chord, 1 after A, B. E, F, G, A, B. So the sequence then, instead of A, D, A, E, D, A, E, it's E, A, E, B7 are 5, but instead of going 5, 4, 1, 5, we just go 5, back to 1. And then it all starts over again. Okay, so a couple things. One is that when you do that alternating thing, you can get kind of a cool sound by doing what's called muting the strings. So instead of letting them ring, I'm lifting right after I hit the chord. And in this case, I'm not playing these lower strings because I want I want those strums to be completely muted. So I'm just strumming the strings that I'm fingering. And it gives it kind of a trainy sort of feel, okay, like a train chugging along, right? And you can do that on your A chord. And same with your B7. Um, you don't do it through the whole song. You don't have to. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, if a string escapes and ends up ringing, doesn't matter. It's all just about, you know, the sort of change into that train-ish kind of thing. So, you know, when I'm doing this song, I just do it once in a while. Like maybe I do it in between the verses. Train keeps a rolling down to San Antonio. So it's just kind of an effective little sort of tool. Last thing we're going to talk about is the beginning of the solo. There's a very prominent lick that starts it. And that's on your 7th fret. And then you go to your 10th fret. And it just goes back and forth. Giving it a little bend. And a little vibrato there. And then you can use your open position blues scale to do the rest of the solo. Like that's what I had Dean do when we did that song. Does that 4 times. Okay, and you can actually practice soloing sort of like I did. Hit your open E string. Since you can't, you know, obviously play this and solo at the same time, this can just give a little backup. And I'm doing the same on the A string. Can't do it on the B string because there's no open B. I mean, there's that open B, but it doesn't really work because it's not a low note. So you can just kind of and kind of play around with it. Anyway, so work on that open position blues scale, and then that little riff there, and we'll talk a little bit more about the soloing, and also we will talk about adding bass lines in between the chords. So we'll talk about that next week. All right, again, have a great trip, and we'll see you next week, I think.